How's it going, trainers? Welcome to my favorite video every week on the channel. I've combed through over 3,000 deck lists that were played in Pocket's competitive tournaments recently and fished up the most interesting new decks from Pocket's best brewers that posted results. Let's go ahead and get on into it, shall we? We start off with a Mismagius As-Elf aggressive deck that top 8 a 70 player tournament in the hands of yours truly. If you missed my games with it, I'll link that video in the description down below. I think this deck list is fantastically fun and reasonably powerful. As-Elf poking past things like Druddigon allows you to leverage Cyrus to fish up things like Magneton and Darkrai that aren't quite set up and ready to go. And the confusion on Mismagius feels so incredibly powerful against all of the Executor decks that are running around. Making them flip 2 heads to deal 80 or 1 heads to deal 40 gives you an incredible amount of sustain. And the important thing to note about confusion is that it doesn't go away when they flip heads the first time. This means you really get to punish these somewhat greedy Executor decks for not playing cards like Leaf or X-Speed that allow them to exchange out their Pokemon that's in their lead spot. We also get to occasionally cheese out free wins in the eggs matchup thanks to Farfetch'd plus copies of Giovanni occasionally scrambling an egg before they get the chance to evolve. Next up, we have Empoleon getting on the scoreboard for the first time, posting an impressive 11-1 record in the tournament it was played in. From a theory perspective, I really like this deck build around Manaphy. One of Manaphy's downsides while being an incredibly powerful acceleration is that your opponent is typically going to knock it out before you can retreat it. This means going Manaphy immediately into an EX Pokemon is generally a liability because if they clear the EX, you lose the game. In enter Empoleon being a potent 1 knockout point Pokemon that you can follow up your Manaphy with, dish out a ton of damage, and then finally allowing you to close the game out on an EX Pokemon once your opponent's taken their 2 points. This is obviously a Misty deck as well, so you're able to occasionally just get your coin flip high rolls in and run people out with your Palkia before they ever get a chance to set up. This deck list also gets to leverage 2 copies of Cyrus really efficiently thanks to both Empoleon and Palkia's big attacks, letting you blast your opponent's bench for chip shots worth of damage, giving you a lot of control over the pacing and outcome of the mid to late game. Our next deck list is another potential innovation in the Manaphy space featuring Gyarados EX and Frost Rotom of all cards. Similar to what I just talked about with Empoleon, I just really like the idea in general of going Manaphy into a single knockout point Pokemon into finishing on a powerful EX, and Frost Rotom is a really innovative way to supplement your Gyarados EX. The chip shots of damage to your opponent's bench Pokemon means that Gyarados gets to get in range of one-shotting things that have 160 or more HP that would typically take it 2 turns, and those bench chip shot points of damage obviously make your copy of Cyrus that much more efficient and deadly. I really think Manaphy variations are one of the biggest spots to find innovation in Pokemon Pocket right now, and this really feels like one that could be worth exploring more. Next up, we have a Luxray Electivire build that put up a 6-2 record in the tournament that it was played in. Luxray, I think, is genuinely one of the best cards in our metagame to punish the dirtily control decks that are looking to hide behind something like a Druddigon, cracking into their backline for a whopping 120 points of damage, especially when paired in tandem with the Electabuzz that deals 40, lets you clear out things like Darkrai and Magnezone before they ever make it to the active Pokemon slot. Falkner is just such an incredibly powerful support card, letting you not only blast with Luxray multiple turns in a row, but also take advantage of energy you're discarding to things like retreat cost in the mid game. I think one of the big strengths of this deck past all of that, however, is the fact that it's all single knockout point Pokemon, many of which are quite chunky, meaning your opponent is regularly going to have to deal upwards of 300 points of damage to secure a game win against you. Next up, we have a Pidgeot Skarmory variation that posted a 5-2 result in the tournament that it was played in. Skarmory in particular has been an increasingly popular card because its 50 damage attack gives you a chance to scramble an egg before it ever evolves. From a theory perspective, I think Baby Pidgeot is an excellent candidate to pair with Skarmory. The drive off ability works really well with Skarmory's ability to pressure things, especially if they're looking to retreat back safely to the bench. And Pidgeot is notably a card that feels good when going first. You evolve into your stage 1, attack for 30, and then evolve into your stage 2 and start cracking for 70, which makes up for the fact that Skarmory decks often feel a bit lackluster when they don't have that first energy advantage present. Next up, we have a Combee Victory Bell mashup that looks like it absolutely dominated all of its Darkrai matchups in the smaller tournament where it finished with a 5-1 record. This deck list is sporting all single knockout point Pokemon, which when combined in tandem with Giant Cape and Erica means your opponent is going to have to deal an absolutely massive amount of damage to get through everything you're putting on the board. I would wager this deck list also has an incredible consistency factor as well, with your copies of Combee helping you fish up your basics ASAP, and 2 copies of Pokemon Communication ensuring that you have your evolutions as quickly as possible, game in and game out. Up next, we have a Lumineon and Starmie EX variation that had a 7-3 record in the tournament with which it was played. I was super excited to see this as one of my favorite decks from the previous season. I absolutely love the inclusion of Glaceon in this deck list as another 1 knockout point Pokemon that's also reasonably aggressive and disruptive with its ability to paralyze on a coin flip every turn. One noteworthy deck building choice here is that it's choosing to play 2 copies of Potion as opposed to Giant Cape, and looking at its matchups from the event that it was played, it lost to Magnezone decks every time it played into them. Perhaps swapping those potions for Cape so your Starmie can survive at least 1 Magnezone hit could be a way to make that matchup a little bit less bad. Next up, we had an interesting take on the Lucario Fighting Box variations that have been running around the format. This one playing Marowak EX as its finisher of choice. This deck list had an impressive 11-2 record in the tournament with which it was played. Noteworthy inclusions being Giant Cape as one of the utility cards of choice to give you a little bit more sustain in your otherwise aggressive deck. Continuing with fighting innovations this week, we have a Dugtrio Rampardos variation that had a 7-3 record in the Swiss rounds of the Ursi Day tournament. Dugtrio letting you flip a coin every single turn to effectively blank your opponent's attack seems like a fantastically reasonable way to buy yourself time to set up your powerful Rampardos finisher. As always, I think one of the great strengths of this type of fighting list is the fact that all of your cards offer just a single knockout point, meaning your opponent's going to have to clear 3 of them every game if they want to get the win over you. Up next, we have a Gallade EX variation that posted an 8-1-1 match record during the Swiss rounds of the Ursi Day tournament this past weekend. It cut through Executor and Darkrai and Skarmory and Charizard, getting wins against basically every major archetype during its run. I really like the inclusion of not only 2 Rocky Helmet, but 2 Cyrus as well, just really leaning into the things that you want to be doing. I think Cyrus in tandem with our 2 copies of Hitmonlee in particular is especially deadly and allows you to really dictate the terms of engagement against a variety of things. One fantastic breakpoint to point out is that Hitmonlee dealing 30 to a Magnezone means when you pull it up with Cyrus, it only needs a single energy on it for Gallade to knock it out, thanks to weakness being in effect. Next up, we have a blast from the Genetic Apex metagame past, an Arbok Wheezing posting a 5-2 result in a tournament. We've got 1 Darkrai EX here as the 5th basic that I think is an excellent fit. When I had played this deck previously, it always felt like it was struggling to find that last ideal Pokemon, and Darkrai certainly feels like it. One somewhat interesting inclusion here is the 2 total copies of Dawn. Obviously, that has powerful synergy with Darkrai and then pushing an energy up to Weezing or Arbok, but with only 1 copy of Darkrai, I would be surprised if 2 copies of Dawn wasn't perhaps a little bit overkill overall. Our last deck list this week is an interesting Magnezone variation featuring Ninetales and Blaine as their other attacker. I think this is a really interesting pairing because Ninetales is a card you never wanted to lead on in previous previous formats, because once you started attacking with it, it demanded your energy every single turn. In enter Magneton charging up into Magnezone, we can lead on this incredibly aggressive Ninetales attacker, starting to deal 90 or 120 every single turn with Blaine, while still charging up a beefy secondary attacker in the backline that will be ready to go when they eventually take your Ninetales down. The inclusion of 2 copies of Giant Cape as well as Potion also works to solve one of the issues that Ninetales has always had of being a somewhat squishy 90 HP stage 1. I think the only decision in this deck list that gives me a little bit of a head scratch is the 2 copies of Cyrus. Both of the attackers here hit for very large amounts of damage. That's going to clear a lot of things in a single go. So I think at absolute best, I would be inclined to split Cyrus 1-1 with a Sabrina, so you can force up lower HP things that are still at full health from the bench for our big attackers to be able to clear out easily. While our metagame is definitely getting a little bit more defined as we head on into our 3rd week of the Space Time Smackdown, it's pretty clear from combing over tournament results that there are still lots of things to be discovered and found in this metagame. Have you found something new at home that you've been tearing it up with that you think I should see? Let me know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed all of these sweet deck ideas, make sure you smash that like button. And if you want to see some of them in action here, not too far off, make sure you're subscribed to the channel as well, so you don't miss any of my daily deck highlights of all sorts of off-meta things like these ones, as well as future metagame reports and sweet tournament deck lists like this in the future. As always, I appreciate you making it all the way through to the end, and I hope your next pack is an excellent one.